Hello, happy Hispanic Heritage Month, my fellow Latinos, and welcome to another episode of CTLN Opinion Plus. As you know, this is a place for our opinions and where we talk about current events and questions the Latino community are curious to know. Today we have Commissioner Miguel Cardona. He is the Commissioner of Education at the State Department in Connecticut. He has a well-rounded perspective of the Connecticut education system, having been a teacher, a principal, and an assistant superintendent before the role that he has now. Welcome, Commissioner Cardona. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be here with you.
Great. So it's been a hectic time for you. Luckily, Connecticut is one of the states that has the fewest cases of coronavirus. So you guys opted to start instruction in person. How did that come about?
Right. You know, we're fortunate in Connecticut that the majority of the people are really following along and doing their part to reduce the spread of coronavirus by wearing masks and keeping distance. So our numbers were some of the best in the country, and we asked districts to plan for full student return, a hybrid version, which means that only some of the students come in, and a full remote plan in the event that the numbers were really high. District worked really hard to develop plans, and you know, most districts in Connecticut, about 60% of them are hybrid. We have about 30% that are fully in, and you know, a lot of hard work went into those plans. And you know, it's really now about implementing the plans that you created and adjusting as you have to as you go along.
So recently, I've seen that you received a letter from the teachers union, and they asked for statewide mandated guidelines and not local guidelines. What has the state done, and how much do you rely on those local guidelines?
Sure. Yeah, I'm glad you asked the question. You know, since March, we've had weekly meetings. Sometimes 3 times a week, sometimes 2 times a week, but at least once a week we meet with our union partners to develop plans and to hear different thoughts on reopening and also any concerns that they're hearing throughout the state. So it's really important that not only do we look at when they share concerns, but also make sure we have a structure in place where we're partnering as partners should. With regard to the guidance, we have Addendum 4, which tells you the metrics that you should be using on whether to open or close. And it's very clear, it's consistent. We need consistency when decisions are being made. They cannot be arbitrary. So Addendum 4 has that. Addendum 4 has been out in public since early August. Addendum 5 communicates, and Addendum 9 communicate specific scenarios. So for example, if a student in a school has COVID, what do you do with that student? Do you quarantine that student? Do you quarantine the people around that student? Do you quarantine the teacher? So that's a guidance, or Addendum number 5. That's been out for over a month. And Addendum 9, again, late August, we put that one out. That talked about the scenarios. So do you shut down a school, or do you just shut down a wing of a school when there's a case? That's pretty consistent. That's been out for a while now. I think the question that came up in the communication is, why is it that some districts are doing different things? And is that decision a local decision? And it absolutely is. When we have a superintendent and a local public health director who are asked to make the final decision on how to move forward, we count on that partnership there. They have the information, such as how many students were impacted, how many adults, are the students interacting a lot? They know that information. They use the guidelines that the state provided, which is a starting point for the conversation. And then depending on the scenario, they make a decision that they have to make based on what they know at the ground level. I'll give you an example of that. Last weekend, I was called on a Sunday evening by a superintendent. He said, Miguel, we know that there's a case here, but we have not gotten in contact with everyone that was in that class yet. We haven't called them yet. They haven't picked up the phone. We wanted to tell them to quarantine, but because we haven't communicated with them yet, we haven't been able to reach them. We don't want them coming into the school. We're going to have to shut down that whole school. So they're making decisions at the ground level based on the information they have. And a lot of that information really is based on contact tracing, which is such an important part of keeping everyone healthy and safe. contact tracing and making sure you communicate with everyone who's been in contact with the person that's infected. Those decisions need to be made at the ground level where they're having conversations.
You kept mentioning addendums. Is that addendums? Where are they from, and does the public have access to see them?
They're all public. If you go to the State Department of Education website, or just go to Google, the simplest way to do it, the way I do it, is you go to Google, put in CSDE, and then Connecticut State Department of Education is going to pop up. You hit that link, and you'll see COVID information. Click on that link, and one of the first ones there is our plan and all the addendums. And, the addendums came about, our plan was delivered to the governor for consideration in June. And since then, there have been at least 13 addendums to provide more specific information. One of the addendums is something as specific as band. You think band instruments, right? Like, what's the harm there, right? Some states have canceled music altogether. What we did was we worked with our partners at Yale School of Public Health and our amazing partners at the Department of Public Health, and we came up with guidance on how to reduce risk in music programs. So that's an addendum. We also have an addendum that I think is very important for families to consider looking up on facial coverings. They're not all made the same. We know that, right? We know some are more effective than others. So there's some great guidance there on facial coverings and rules for the school regarding facial coverings. So the addendums are there, and our plan is there for everyone to see and have.
So you mentioned school band. My next question is about athletics. What is the future of athletics right now with fewer cases and face coverings? What is it looking like?
Sure. I have to preface that response by saying athletics and music and theater, that's all part of school. That's not a separate thing. The athletics is such an integral part of a comprehensive school, and so are the arts. So we need to look at it as it's just like academics, or just as important. And for some kids, and especially many Latinos who in the past might have felt disconnected from school, they might have felt connected with athletics or connected with the arts. That's where they can express themselves, right? So we have to recognize the important role that they play. Athletics in particular is still going on. There are 2 sports that were identified by the Department of Public Health of being high-risk sports. And by high risk, meaning that there's a good likelihood that they would spread infection. So adjustments were made to those sports, or they were delayed, or the recommendation was made to delay them. As you know, and as Connecticut knows, the Connecticut Interscholastic Athletic Conference is the governing body around sports, and they recently made the decision to postpone football for fall and potentially leave it open for later in the year, which I think is a compromise that we're hoping can happen. We know how important it is, but we also know that every decision that we're making in schools and in our community should be based on health and safety first.
Yeah. So there are families of all economic and social, and Connecticut is very, very diverse. And for some, they are trying to keep their children safe, but internet is also unstable. How do you meet the needs of families statewide that have unreliable internet and that don't feel confident sending their children to school?
Yeah. One thing we decided early on, the governor and I, is that all families should have the option to keep their children home and learning from home. And now that sounds simple, but there wasn't a system set up, an online learning system. So every district had to create a method for students to receive learning from home. That's a significant lift in 3 to 4 months. So I just want to acknowledge and applaud the work that was done by educators across the state to lift up a system that didn't exist before. Additionally, the governor committed over $43 million to close the digital divide that you spoke of. We heard in the spring, Dalio Philanthropy stepped up with over $24 million in a donation for 60,000 laptops. And those laptops were distributed in the spring months to students that didn't have laptops so that they can engage in online learning. The governor committed, as I mentioned earlier, 43 million to continue to close the digital divide. But that doesn't just mean laptops. It means working with providers to provide internet access so that those computers could log on to internet so they could get access to the learning. There's also thousands of hotspots, those little devices that provide internet. Those are being distributed. I think Bridgeport already got some. So the governor is really committed to closing the digital divide in Connecticut once and for all so that those students can have access. And then lastly, you could have the internet connection and you could even have a laptop, but that's not all you need. What happens when you log on? What are you getting access to? Is there quality content on the other side of the screen? Mm-hmm. The State Department of Education developed a learning hub in the months of May and June. And there are resources there for districts for free, for families for free, in English and Spanish, so that we can keep students engaged in high quality learning. The last thing we want to do is lower the bar. We recognize that you can't build a system that's perfect overnight, but we're going to continue to make it better. And we want to make sure that students have devices, that they have connectivity, but equally as important, that they have quality content so they can continue their learning.
So speaking about learning, it is Hispanic Heritage Month.
Yes.
And we are living in changing times, and students are becoming more educated and want more education about history that wasn't taught in school when I was in elementary school. Are there plans to include more Black and Latino history in classrooms in the future?
Yes, yeah, or I should say, sí. It's long overdue. I went to school in Connecticut, and it's unfortunate that it wasn't until I got to college where I took a course on Puerto Rico, and I felt that sense of pride, and I got to know a little bit about my background. And without question, that gave me a level of confidence that I needed to continue to be successful in education and pursue my degrees. And we shouldn't wait for students to take it as an elective in college. We should have opportunities for students to see people that look like them in their coursework. There's, and I can't think of the author of it, but the concept of curriculum being a tool to provide windows and mirrors is something that has been widely written about. So the curriculum should provide windows into other cultures, right? So learning about Latinos and Black leaders is not only good for Latinos, it's also good for all students, right? So a window into other cultures, but the curriculum should also be a mirror. It should be a mirror unto yourself. When I look at my books and I'm reading, I should see characters that look like me, with backgrounds like me, so I can connect more. I think if we do that better, we're going to engage our learners better. And it's good for all kids, not just Latinos. But in honor of Hispanic Heritage Month, I can tell you with certainty that there's not a day that goes by without me thinking about the potential impact we can have on our learners if we introduce them to their history and their beautiful culture so that they can feel proud of themselves, be orgullosos to be a Latino, and to continue to lead with those Latino principles that we know propel us in all of our careers.
Thank you so much for joining us, Commissioner Miguel Cardona. Feliz month of Latinos and Hispanics. Thank you for joining us again.
My pleasure. Thank you for the time.
Yeah. Tune in next week for another episode. Follow us on Twitter at CT Latino News and Instagram at CT_Latino News. I'm Savani Campos with CTLN Opinion Plus. See you next time.